You are listening to the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. I'm Rose O'Donovan. On this episode, we will be talking about the future Common Agricultural Policy and land use, looking ahead to the forthcoming Irish presidency kicking off on July 1st, and telling you about a Forum for Ag regional conference taking place in Dublin on June 2nd. And with me to discuss these topics is Barry Cowen, an MEP from Ireland's Midlands Northwest, who sits with the Liberal Renew Europe group here in the European Parliament. Barry is a full member of the EP's Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development and is Renew Europe's shadow rapporteur for the Parliament's report on the future of agriculture and the post-CAP 2027. Great to see you again, Barry.
Thanks very much indeed, Rose, and thanks for having me.
The last time you and I met was at the Forum for the Future of Agriculture at the Square in Brussels on April 14th, where, Barry, it's fair to say you gave a blunt assessment that the ambition in the Commission's future CAP proposal is real, but the budget proposed to deliver it is not. You said at the time, how can it be delivered? It's dependent solely and totally on finance and on budget. It's as simple as that and as plain as that. Here in the European Parliament, yourself and your MEP colleagues adopted a position on the multi-annual financial framework on April 28th. What were your key asks there, Barry?
Well, the key ask is in relation to the amount of funding that's made available, and based on inflationary pressures, the ask is 433 billion. Compared to a 293 that's on the table presently, compared to a 386, which is the outgoing figure. And as I said on the occasion you referred to, the commitments in relation to ambition, much of it we share from the Commission's perspective. The structures and the architecture within it in relation to the pillar system is different, but ultimately farmers will judge it on the basis of what's available to them to help them and assist them to provide production systems that meet environmental ambition and consumer sentiment. But it's ultimately down to budget. Our proposal, some would describe as motherhood and apple pie. When it gets down to the nitty gritty, that funding isn't available as much as we would want it to be. We do recognise and appreciate and acknowledge the need for the increase in spending associated with defence and security, but we would say that cannot be complete without adequate provision for food security. So therefore, I believe, those of us who have been charged with a responsibility on behalf of other members need to bring forward credible means and methods by which we can close the funding gap in the first place and seek an increase, no matter how big or small it may be thereafter, and then find ways maybe within the proposals to shave some savings and then look at the redistribution of those savings with the keen interest in generational renewal, with the keen interest in no further conditionality associated with food production, but adequate reward and rather than cost foregone metric that was there previously in relation to any new eco-enviro schemes that should be in place in order to hurry up the transition and to ensure that those systems are ones that can produce more food but can do so sustainably, and also recognise the role that smaller, less productive, less profitable holdings can have and give them a value that they don't have presently, and monetise that value because of its commitment to communities and regions that otherwise would be depopulated where farming activity is not taking place, despite the fact that it mightn't be the whole income in that household.
Fair enough. So you're speaking there about, I suppose, plugging the gap, the 20% gap in overall money available for farmers for this next programming period, as you say, 2028 to 2034. So ways to bridge that gap, Barry, then. One option, of course, is to ask national capitals to stump up the cash to boost their contributions in co-financing. But how realistic is that, given budgetary constraints at the moment? You obviously mentioned yourself there, defence and security spending at an all-time high. But how do we bridge that gap when the budgets are tight?
No two member states are the same.
Fair enough, yeah.
No two member states have the same commitment to agriculture or participation of agriculture within its economy as others. And the funding just isn't there, I know that. I would like to think it is within our own government, but I think there's architecture and infrastructure within any eventual cap to allow increased commitments by virtue of matching funds from member states that can. So, I've looked at it. and come up with two suggestions. In the first instance, the funding that was made available as a result of the Mercosur agreement, when President von der Leyen provided a 48 billion injection mid-term in the new cap. That could be front-loaded. There is provision for emergency funding in the event of the fears and concerns and the worries associated with Mercosur becoming a reality anyway. And secondly, there's a 45 billion envelope supposedly for rural development. I think that should be back in the cap envelope, save for commitments in relation to some rural development programs like LEADER and so forth. But at present, in the proposal that the Commission have made, they're saying that stays in an NRPP that's based on cohesion. Many member states that have had success in relation to cohesion metrics in recent years wouldn't get as much if that were the case. So again, I wouldn't have an issue with that were it adequately funded in the round, but it's not. Therefore, it has to go back into the cap envelope, and I think there's universal support amongst European Parliament members, and I think members of the Council too. And hopefully that will win the day, and we can bridge the 10 to 20% gap in that manner almost immediately.
You mentioned there, I suppose, the idea of the single fund approach, the NRPP as we call it. Many might say that we're essentially renationalising the common agricultural policy, that it will be no longer common if this is going to be the direction of travel for the European farm policy. What's your take on that?
Well, I do think there's an element of political realism here, whereby the powers that be in Brussels would rather much of the protests that were taking place here would take place throughout the member states. There's a set of grounding, there's a set of dominant rules that would guide and would be the guiding principles of any regional plans in the various member states. And I do think that there is scope for what's proposed, insofar as no two member states are the same. We've seen issues arise, for example, in relation to GAIAC and its interpretation, despite the fact that, soil types vary in regions, let alone countries, let alone member states. And that couldn't be squared during the last mandate, whereas now these proposals, these opportunities for member states to have some guiding principles in relation to dominant rules and mandatory rules with some voluntary rules can be a recipe for various member states to get it right in relation to that transition that I mentioned earlier that hasn't happened at the pace one would have liked, and the protests outside here were as a result of them transition and that transition not being adequately funded. And we have to try and move from this crossroads with a new cap that does that and does something in relation to generational renewal rather than the aspiration that it has been for far too long.
We'll come back to generational renewal in a moment, because I know that's a topic close to your heart. Another central plank of the Commission's proposal is the whole idea of digressivity of farm payments, and then the capping of payments at €100,000 per farm per year. I understand that you hosted or co-hosted an event here in the European Parliament on May 5th on this very topic.
Yeah. What
were some of the key outcomes, Barry, from that gathering?
Well, it's a major issue for many countries, not necessarily for my own country in Ireland, where 55% of the farms share 45% of the funding. So we've capping and degressivity has been an option from a voluntary perspective.
So capping is
for nations
in Ireland
heretofore.
Yeah. It is. It's present in Ireland.
Yeah.
The capping of farm payments.
Exactly. So nations where it's not would include Czechia, Germany, I think Poland, Eastern Bloc countries in the main, where the configuration of farms and size of farms is far different than others like ourselves in France and Spain and so forth. So while it is on paper a very fair means of dispersal of funds, the reality in those countries is far different than the reality in ours. And it would take some legal efforts to address that in order to ensure that massive farms don't get massive payments, basically.
And there's loopholes around it, I presume, as well. You could always divide, acreage. There's probably loopholes there.
That's it. You've cooperatives there. You've limited companies there. but some of those cooperatives were in the likes of Eastern Germany, where the land was taken from them in the 40s and was given back to them now. But if they were to try and farm the holding as it was, they wouldn't make a sufficient living from it, and they can get a return on their investment by virtue of pooling their resources and making these large-scale entities a reality. So, there is scope for investigation and analysis and hopefully recommendations to get around those legal log jams that would stop the likes of those countries, because it is a means, to be fair, of finding savings for the dispersal to more meaningful initiatives targeted at transition that I referred to as well. Yeah.
And do you agree with the concept, the overall concept, I suppose, of Commissioner Christoph Hansen's idea of targeting farm payments to those that need it most, and his definition of those that need it most, the young farmers, the new entrants, women farmers,
I do.
I
think
you agree with that?
That's laudable and commendable, and it's great that he has specifically, although it's not, he talked a lot about seeking to increase the payment from young farmers from 3% of the cap envelope to 6% in member states, and my own government has committed to 8%. But it's not actually in the legal text. So
that's an option for member states.
It's a sort of option, and he and others, and I agree with it too, spoke about it has to be complemented by an exit strategy rather than what he has proposed to just cliff edge payments to those in receipt of a pension, which is fine and good for an aspiration, but for the reality of politicians dealing with that on the ground, it's a far different means of addressing it. And so it'd have to be some sort of compromise there. It'd be off the table, I would say. But I would agree that member states should have complementary packages for exit, which is their competence and their responsibility. And they can only draw down these generation renewal commitments in the event that they haven't those in place in their own member states. And that's something I would support.
And generational renewal, you describe it yourself as an existential threat, which is fair enough for the farming and the broader rural communities, I suppose. A lot of talk about it here in Brussels. We have the generational renewal strategy that was unveiled last year. Is there any silver bullet, Barry, to sort of addressing this, to making the sector attractive?
Yeah, well, look, double payments for young farmers, starter packs for young farmers. The whole issue is access to land.
Correct.
The whole issue.
Any ways around that? I know that there's a land observatory being created at the moment by DG Agri, but I mean, where's sort of the nuts and bolts? Where's the nuts and bolts in this?
They haven't emerged yet, to be quite honest. That exit strategy, together with the options for new entrants, is something that can begin that process at least. But there are other means. If I look at the majority of farms, despite what I said earlier, are less than 10 hectares. I think it's 66% of farms throughout Europe are less than 10 hectares. And much of those in different regions in their own right are not very profitable. They're dependent on off-farm income. And if we don't help and assist or improve the lot of those farmers and come up with a definition of active farming that recognises the value of nature restoration, of rewetting, of carbon and nature crediting, until we find a way of monetising that and giving it the proper value because of the benefit that accrues to the respective communities, which otherwise would be depopulated in the event of us abandoning them. So that's the challenge, in as much as the challenge is to reward those who increase very arable, productive land with new methods and sustainable methods, and they too equally need to be rewarded for it. So it's a challenge, of course, when you think of the initial cap in its first form back in the 60s and through the 70s and so forth, and even into the 80s before McSharry was purely based on production. Was purely an income support for those who needed it, who wouldn't otherwise be in the position to deliver food production. And then you had Fischler and McSharry and Fischler in relation to moving away from or coupling productivity and area-based aid. That now has run its course, and it's challenged by the advance of climate change and its influence and its impact. And now further challenged by the geopolitical reality, which is war.
Context, yes,
which is looking
entirely.
at costs associated with inputs in relation to fertilisers, in relation to bank costs, in relation to fuel costs. A huge challenge that we have to address.
And as you say, food security then central to all of that.
Yes.
Right, central to that narrative. Going back then to your report, as I mentioned at the outset, your shadow rapporteur on the future CAP report for the Renew Europe political group. You mentioned two instruments that you're pushing for in terms of the front loading of the Mercosur and then using that envelope that was designated maybe for rural development. What can you tell us about the proposed timeline, I suppose, Barry, in terms of sort of the next steps with this?
It'll be hard to produce a report without finality coming to the budgetary issue.
And what's your timing on that then in terms of sort of that's EU leaders? Is it already by summer? What's your understanding about the MFF timing?
I think it'll be pivotal responsibility of the Irish presidency to reach, to get agreement and to negotiate and deliver agreement by the end of the year by their own presidency. So I would expect they will meet that expectation. Okay, so
we'll go back now to, I suppose, as one of the announcements we were going to make, obviously, was the Irish presidency coming up, as you say, on July 1st. Critical juncture, as you say, in terms of the future common agricultural policy and the long-term budget. You spoke there, I suppose, about progressing on the discussions in terms of the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework, and taking forward the whole debate on the CAP. But do you think with the timeline, there's August in between, there's going to be 4 weeks off, there's Christmas, is something concrete by the end of this year, is that feasible?
Well, it has to be seen as feasible, it has to be seen as practicable, it has to be seen as its main responsibility, therefore its main objective to conclude those discussions and negotiations, and even if there's conditionality associated with an agreed cap budget from within that, it'll have played a vital role. But it has wider responsibilities, as I mentioned, in relation to defence and security. It has wider responsibilities in relation to, own funds, own resources, means and methods by which that needs to be strengthened. And it has responsibilities in relation to the initial mandate, which was to address competitiveness, and that's been challenged, of course, by everything that has happened since in 2 short years. But, the whole issue in relation to energy production, the whole issue in relation to bringing forward means to address those issues much earlier than is presently the case in relation to infrastructure or in relation to the delivery of energy infrastructure, because of the overdependency on Russian gas, because of the overdependency in relation to Middle Eastern oil and so forth that has been cruelly exposed now on industry and business and commerce and cost of living. So that's a huge area of responsibility, and the state aid rules associated with assistance to various member states is something it will have to preside over as well. And it's a busy time.
Busy 6 months, yeah, for sure.
But look, they've a good reputation. They've carried out their role efficiently and expertly in the past, and there's been a lot of preparation that has been evident here by virtue of the amount of visits from government ministers of all departments and their respective staff, meeting with the various groups, meeting with rapporteurs in relation to various files, and also been more than capable and able to have the staff here that can deliver a respectable but a very significant presidency too.
As you say, this isn't our first rodeo, going back to the first half of 2013,
yes,
when we had the CAP, the Common Fisheries Policy, the long-term budget, all within our mandate and successfully wrapped up, as you say.
Yeah, and restrictive finances available to ourselves as a result of the crash at the time and the programme we were in to restore our public finances, which thankfully have gone in the right direction since anyway.
So all eyes on Dublin, as you say, Barry. Another priority for the next semester coming up will be sustainable livestock production. There's a livestock strategy due out on July 7th, and this is obviously a topic, a hot topic even from the Irish point of view. What would you like to see in that forthcoming strategy that Commissioner Christoph Hansen
it has to be alongside protein.
It
has to be alongside protein policy. It has to be our strategy alongside fertiliser strategy. Because livestock production is severely impacted in the absence of means and methods to address those efficiencies that have crystallised in recent times. We've seen many livestock figures going down when, in fact, world population is going up, and that food security we spoke about earlier is essential in our efforts to address it and provide means and methods by which we can increase it, but increase it sustainably. And that's our raison d'etre, and that's our commitment, and that's our responsibility. And we'll be failing in that, in delivering progress in relation to that, or at least put a roadmap in place that can address it.
And on the protein side of things, the Commission, I understand, is going to come up with a revised plan, or a revised protein plan. What would you like to see in there?
Well, I'd like to see something on plant protein in relation to the tillage sector. There has to be incentivised to ensure we address the imbalances that are presently in relation to Europe as a whole and its dependency on South American states to provide soy and other proteins, for example. And in relation to the whole issue around meat protein, then, you know, we see it at home. We would hope to see an expansion of the likes of a dairy beef scheme that looks at bringing the dairy and beef sector closer together while respecting both place in a successful agricultural industry, because it can address some of the fears and concerns in relation to emissions that otherwise would be addressed by culling, which we cannot contemplate in the context of. So,
as you say, a holistic approach there. And both, as I understand it, are due out in the early days of the Irish presidency. July 7th is one of the dates being floated at the moment. Last point, if I may, under the Irish presidency, new genomic techniques, Barry. What's your take on that? And do you see the Irish presidency taking that discussion forward in the second semester?
I would never say no to advancements in genomics. As I said to you earlier in relation to dairy beef, it's because of the advancements in genomics that it is possible to produce a product that can satisfy the needs of both and can address the issues associated with emissions which are impacting gravely on the climate, on the earth.
Okay, thank you for that, Barry, indeed. And just a shameless plug, if I may, for the next Forum for Agriculture conference, regional conference, that is taking place in Dublin on June the 2nd from 12:30 onwards until around 5 p.m. that Tuesday afternoon. Will you be joining us there, Barry?
I certainly hope so. I know it's June the 2nd, which is a Tuesday, which is a committee week here, which is an agricultural committee week, and because of the specific issues we refer to and the progress that needs to be made in relation to them, there may be issues that I can't get away from, but I will be doing my utmost to ensure that I can join you again, as I did in Brussels, in Dublin.
Fantastic. Well, great to hear. And just a plug there for this regional conference, as I say, in Dublin on June 2nd. Topics on the agenda: driving agri-food system transformation in the EU, financing the transition, as you say, a key topic, Barry, and looking a deep dive into that. Sustainable livestock production, one of the key priorities during the Irish presidency in the second semester. And where are we on the CAP? A fundamental question indeed, a timely discussion. So I might wrap it up there. Barry, thank you very much indeed for your insights.
Thank you, Rose. Thanks very much indeed.
Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Food Systems Podcast.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you.
You've been listening to another edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. It's been a pleasure having you with us here today. Please do join us again very soon. Until the next time, from all of us here, take care.